What's the story, guys? Sorry it's been so long since the last video, but there's been a few stories that have come to the fore that I actually wanted to wait a while on to see what way they'd pan out. Which I can do because unlike the mainstream media, I'm not tied into a 24-hour news cycle where I'm desperately trying to get ahead of somebody else. And I'm glad I did, because we've got at least 3 incidents now with the mainstream media just jumping straight in with their size 12s on a story and just getting it completely wrong. Or to be more precise, they've backed people and individuals whose stories have basically blown up in their faces, as the people involved either turn out to be subversives, knife-wielding psychopaths, or outright druggy crims. Hence the title of this video, why do our mainstream media keep backing criminals? And the only answer I can come up with is basically institutional bias. It's either rampant Trump derangement syndrome, which causes them to turn off the critical faculties of their brain, or extremist politics, which causes them to focus on the institutions of the state and tear them down. The embarrassment around which they all could have saved themselves if they just waited a week to see more information. Case in point, the Renee Goode situation in connection to ICE over in America. We were told by the press and the politicians were signal boosting this that this was just a mother dropping her kids to school. Well, now a week after that happened, anyone using social media has seen a totally different story. There's a tenet in journalism where you're supposed to have 2 or 3 separate people confirming a story before you print it. Well, on social media, we've seen dozens of people completely unconnected, all taking videos of the event from all different angles. And the timeline we saw wasn't a mother dropping her kids to school. It was a subversive who's part of a shadowy signal group that has very strong ties to the Tim Walz campaign in the Democratic Party, who are basically organising the populace as a kind of quasi-Stasi, compiling information on ICE officers and federal officers in relation to their names, their addresses, the licence plates of their cars, and then organising, quote, commuters, end quote, to go out and harass them. It's basically a paramilitary organisation. And what's baffling about this is RTE seems to be fully behind it. If you go back to David McCullough's Today Show on the 2nd of February, and I think it's pretty much the first item that comes up, he does an interview with a guy who purports to be from the Associated Press, who is a member of this group, as I said, it's the Signal Group. And it's the most amazing interview you're going to hear. This lad joins up the organisation, jokes about how his own licence plate has turned up on it, and how he had to clear it with the local thugs that he was on their side. Talks about how he's following these lads around who are basically interfering with ICE operations and federal officers about their duty, and then end the story by saying that he accosts an ICE officer himself. Now let me use that word again, accost. That's him, not me. He said, completely bare cheeked, that he accosted an ICE officer. Now go look that word up again. That means aggressively approach or remonstrate. I was under the impression that journalists are supposed to approach people, that they're supposed to interview them, that they're supposed to inquire. Not that they're supposed to accost. Accosting is what you do to a criminal in the journalistic sense. You know, if you think back to those Paul Williams days when he used to go about scumbags caught doing something. And he's talking about this in relation to a police officer. And when the police officer, faced with this unknown nutter who's accosting him, who he knows nothing about, who's shoving a microphone in his face and asking him questions, he decides to do the professional thing and stay quiet. David McCullough described this as, and I'm quoting here, sinister. A guy being professional, staying quiet and assessing a situation that he could be dealing with another is sinister. While this lad who was going around compiling information on federal officers, being part of a group which is sending out groups of people to harass them, which is ties to a political party, isn't sinister? It's gobsmacking. And the fact that these guys aren't aware of what they're actually broadcasting just blows my mind. Go listen to that. The 2nd of February 2026. It's got to be like the first item up in it. I mean, honestly, think about it. Think of if there was a WhatsApp group going around to Montrose, taking the license plates to people there, following them home, compiling the names of the engineers and the editors and the journalists that are there, and then sending out groups of people to harass them. I'm pretty sure David McCullough would have a different view of that. But like I said, Trump derangement syndrome, the brain turns off and they just go with it. Another incident that actually happened in the last couple of weeks was the Nchuko case, particularly the inquiry into his death. I will credit the mainstream media with backing off on this big time and looking roundly embarrassed that they even supported this at all, but they clearly wanted this case to be our George Floyd. In their minds, we've got a racially racist, institutionally bigoted police force which is just going around randomly killing black people. And RTE and Virgin rode right in behind that case and stuck their size 12s back in it again. The final report from that inquiry was one of the weirdest statements I've ever heard. They basically claimed that the narrative conclusion was that he was shot. My instant response was, no shit, Sherlock, I could have figured that out on day one. Until you realise that this is basically a media face-saving exercise. Because what they didn't want to actually have to report was that he was basically a knife-wielding maniac who'd assaulted a guy in a Central, I believe, earlier on. I don't know whether he broke his jaw or just busted his nose. But when they came from at his house, he actually came at the guards with a knife. He was pepper sprayed, he was tasered twice, and he was still coming at them, and that's when he got shot. That, to me, is an open and short case of proper practice. What the hell else were they meant to do? You've got some knife-wielding lunatic who's already attacked somebody in town coming at you with a knife. You've already tased him, you already pepper sprayed him, and he's still coming. You would generally need to be on PCP or something like that to keep doing that. And according to the inquest, he was clean as a whistle. So this was pure rage sending him after them. There have been a few loopers trying to latch onto it, Ruth Coppinger in particular, describing the Gardaí's description of as being violent as racist. And the use of other most anodyne language you can possibly imagine being indications of institutional bias. But she just comes off looking like a commie loon who hates the country. And see, the guards is just one more thing that she and hers have to dismantle in order to get their communist utopia. There was no talk, by the way, about all the riots that kicked off after that, when the initial incident happened. Because in the main, they basically realised what fools they look on this one, and they've been quietly burying it as quick as possible. This, though, now brings us to the coup de grace, the absolute best debacle of the tree. In fact, I'd go and say that it's a shambles. In fact, it's a fucking omni-shambles, as I was actually going to do a video on this yesterday. I'm glad I didn't, because even more information has come out today. And what I'm talking about here is the Seamus Cullerton case, and how he's been detained by ICE to be deported back to Ireland. This has just been an absolute spectacular implosion. The story started off with him being a little Irish boy that didn't do no wrong, who was lifted by ICE after he was bringing back supplies to a Home Depot that he had. This was back in September, so he's been about 5 months in this ICE detention facility. The absolute idiot rang into Liveline to actually try and push his own case, bigging it up as a concentration camp, and how his wife tried to get him out on a bond and it was failed, and how they actually tried to forge his signature on deportation orders. And RTE and Virgin lapped this up. They tried to portray this as some sort of exemplar of, Donald Trump's brown shirts rounding up innocent people and throwing them into concentration camps. Until, in a shocking turn of events, the Irish Times, as much as I slagged them off, actually did quality journalism on this story. Instead of buying the story wholesale, they actually did a background check in this guy. And what we found out was very interesting. To this day, if you're reading any cover of this, you will hear them say that he had a visa when he went over there. He didn't. What he had is called an ESTA, an ESTA, an electronic system for tourism or travel application or approval. Sorry, I want to get that correct. It's an electronic system for travel authorization. And what that allows him to do is to partake in a visa waiver program. Now that's the most important word here, waiver. He didn't and never has had a visa, and as such he is not entitled to any of the protections that you get under a visa. That was actually part of the deal of getting this ESTA, because what this guarantees is that within 72 hours, without having to go for an interview, without having to have paperwork, without having to have, 10, 20,000 quid in the bank to prove you're not some sort of drain on their economy, they will authorise you to be able to go to America for 90 days over the next 2 years. On the condition that you can be deported whenever the hell they want if you overstay it by 90 days. You're not allowed work. You're only allowed to do the most basic business, which probably interviews or maybe to meet up with people. And generally what it's used for is travel for holidays. That's what he had. And because he's never had an actual visa, that's why the bond that was lodged by the wife wasn't accepted to get him out of the detention centre. Moreover, one of the other conditions of having this way of accessing the state and the waiver is that you're not actually allowed to apply for a visa when you're there. All these drawbacks are the price of being able to get into America that quickly. He signed up to it. That's what the ICE officer said when they said that he'd actually already signed documentation that allows him to be deported, because that's in the initial ESTA application. The Cullerton case has been the most glorious slow-motion car crash I've ever seen unveil in the Irish public. Because like I said, this is actually only developing. The Irish Times, as I mentioned, actually did background check on this guy, and it turns out he's got active warrants out for his arrest. One for criminal damage back in 2007, which he never turned up for, and another one for possession, intent to supply, and obstruction of a guard in his duty in relation to drug offences in 2009. And that warrant was issued a month after he'd actually bailed it out of the country. The accusation being that he had 25 tabs of ecstasy on him. So now we're presented with the situation where this guy is less a Irish guy who's big in the business, who didn't do no wrong, to more like an active druggy crim who bailed it out of the country to stop being arrested. The Cullerton case is one of the best examples of media manipulation I've ever seen, because some of the stuff that they're even broadcasting and publishing to this day, for instance, the fact that he got married and that he's a green card pending. Yes, he does. He married the girl in April of last year, literally 5 months before he got lifted. The work permit that he has, he got the month before he was lifted. In fact, the application for that might have been what got him nobbled. And just yesterday, another bombshell has dropped. It turns out he has two twin 18-month-old daughters at the time, and he bailed out of the country abandoning them, not sending them a single red cent in support for the last 16 years. So he's a deadbeat dad to boot. And where did I find that juicy bit of information out? Fox News. Kirsha. She's reading from the Mail on Sunday and the Irish Daily Mail. That's where I find out that this lad, that the Irish media has been signal boosting as some poor lad that's been crushed under the heel of Donald Trump, is by all accounts a deadbeat dad, druggy crim, on the run, who looks to have only married the girl he's with in order to get a green card. And if you think that sort of thing that doesn't happen, go look up the movie Green Card with Gerard Depardieu in it. That'll give you a good insight to what goes on. Who single-handedly managed to embarrass every media and political actor in this country. I'll be honest, lads, I think the end of the Seamus Cullerton case is that he's going to get deported, he's going to be sent back home here, and he's going to get arrested under those outstanding warrants. And we will have the glorious vista of RTE and Virgin trying to explain how this lad that they've been lionising for the last month could end up in Mountjoy on druggy charges. I'll be honest, there's so much in this case that I'm not even sure what's going to happen next week. And all of this could have been avoided if they just had done their jobs as journalists, done background research, basic journalism, which the Irish Times did. I really do want to actually give out, and laud them up on this one. I usually slag them off. And to be sure, their article wasn't exactly overflowing with detail. They kept it concise to the point because they weren't happy to report this either. But they did report the facts. That has blown the narrative of RT and Virgin Media and News Talk and Today FM right out of the water. But the sad reality is they just can't help themselves. They just keep lining up behind criminals. They keep lining up behind subversives. They keep lining up behind nutters. And I can only conclude it's because the narrative they're trying to sell is more important than the truth. That's me vid, guys. Sorry again it took so long, but like I said, this kept developing. The bit about the kids, the twins that he had, only dropped yesterday. God only knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So take care. If you like this, like and subscribe and sit down in the comments anything you think. Take care. Bye-bye.